Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I would like first of all to begin where Mr. Stevenson ended. It is to speak about the UN mechanism on this issue. You know very well that Madame Jahangir had done an excellent work before disappearing of this world. She had done a work very important and recognized that a crime against humanity was executed in Iran in 1988. And unfortunately, the new Rapporteur Special and Iran that replaced her, just published a report and totally ignored this issue of the massacre of 1988. Therefore, in my own name and on behalf of the family of the victims, I would like to underline and state my profound regret and disappointment of the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights took this issue out of his report, and I ask myself, why did this happen? What obliged the Special Rapporteur to ignore and put beside this issue, who was at the moment and reported many times with the organization that I represent, which is JVME, Justice for the Victims of the 1988 Massacre. This organization who represents the families. We already spoke about the 2 reports that were published on this issue and that I personally handed to the Special Rapporteur, and I had some debates with him about this issue, and I reminded him last July. I told him, Mr. Rahman, you have an heritage. You, in front of you, the one that Ms. Jahangir left you, you have to take the mission from where Madame Jahangir left it. Unfortunately, I see today that, and I apologize to say this, but we have been deceived because there was no words on the report on this issue of the massacre of 1988. The report of said that there was a crime against humanity. This crime was confirmed by a study, a big-scale study from Amnesty International, and this study underlined the existence of a crime against humanity. The report, or the 2 reports of JVME, underlined that we have seen more than 70 people that gravitated of this power of Iran and are amongst the political deciders. Those people are within those 70 authorities that executed people that had illegal and extrajudicial cases. And now this question was brought to the High Commissioner for Human Rights. This issue was brought to the Secretary General of the United Nations, and also the General Assembly was also brought towards this with all of the documentation available. And today the General Assembly receives the document of the report of the Secretary General. You can see that it just deleted this issue of the report. What can we say from this? What can we take off of it? Do the United Nations have a collective memory? Do they forget? It has not been only 1 year that Madam Jahangir confirmed that this massacre happened, and today there is no more massacre. What will we ask ourselves? This is a question that Mr. Mahaman must answer, and we really hope that he will continue to work on this issue and that the next report will underline this issue. I would also like to speak of the attitude coming from the European governments. You know well that the European governments, Mr. Stevenson also spoke about it and mentioned it several times in agreements that we call associations of agreements with European Union. There are agreements that were signed with Israel, Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria. All of those associations have one article in common, speaking of human rights. And also the same agreements with Russia, association agreements with Pacific countries, the Caribbean countries. All of those association agreements always put forward those articles on human rights, democracy, so that we put into place and establish friendly agreements. Unfortunately, European Union members behaved just like members of other states that do not recognize this right, because if we insert a human rights agreement in a convention, we have to apply it. And why do European states do all of this and this little race to see who comes first in Iran? It is really a big deception, because the European Union that gives lessons on human rights, we expect this union to respect those clauses in the human rights in those agreements that they have signed and ratified. Now, just to move on and to not take too much time, because I must end my speech, but I would just like to mention that the United States, European Union, if we do not take any decisive actions, measures towards the massacres that were committed in Iran, this means that we encourage the Iranian regime to go further and to continue this massacre. And the best example is that the last attack that happened last June in Paris. Because if we continue to forget and to close our eyes on the behavior coming from this regime, this is what is going to happen. We already began with the terrorism in the Middle East. Now we export it in Europe, in Paris, and other places. I would like to end with two points in which I would like to make a call. Renew the call for the families of victims to Mr. Special Rapporteur on human rights issues in Iran, to change and correct the fundamental mistake that has been made in its report, to re-put into the agenda this issue, and that we will see in this next report a discussion on the issue of the executions, extrajudicial executions that were recognized by his predecessor. I would also like to, in the name of the families of victims and in my own name, I would like to make a call to Mr. Jahangir, to Mr. Rahim, that he must also join us in this call to the constitution of an investigation, an independent mechanism. We cannot, 30 years later, wait that Iran has an independent investigation. We all know that this is impossible. So, therefore, we want that the Special Rapporteur joins us to request this independent commission, and that the crimes that happened in 1988 that there will be a follow-up on those crimes. This being said, I would also like to not forget to say that we are ready to give and assist Mr. Rahman, the Special Rapporteur, with everything that is requested, because the family are waiting. The former political prisoners, the survivors of this massacre are here as well. They are waiting. They are expecting a gesture, and they want to be heard. I would like to end by saying this, that Mr. Mahrim, Special Rapporteur, must visit and hear the survivors, the political prisoners, and also the families of the victims. I end by saying this, and I thank you very much for your attention.